Hello and welcome to Wednesday's Words of Worship. I'm Kevin. Now, if you can bring yourself to watch the news, it sounds kind of like a broken record. Lying, violence, division, evil, lying, violence, division, evil. And all of this turmoil can certainly become a source of anxiety and worry. Last Sunday, we continued our sermon series on emotions. Pastor Earl talked about the turmoil and the anxiety that Jesus must have felt as he prayed in the Garden of Gethsemane before he was betrayed, tried, beaten, and crucified. Jesus himself said that his spirit was overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Now, I hope most of us have not and will not reach that level of despair because of our surrounding circumstances. However, in all of our circumstances, whether they're troubling, whether they're concerning, joyful maybe, or redirecting our lives, there's something particularly important that Jesus modeled during his time of desperation and despair. All four of the Gospels relay the account of Jesus taking a walk to pray immediately after the Last Supper. We're informed that taking a walk to pray was something that Jesus did regularly. We might even say habitually or as a tradition. Jesus took time to talk with his Father. This time, Jesus was overwhelmed with sadness and anguish. And he asked God the Father if it were at all possible to not have to go through with this horrible death that Jesus would have to suffer. He said this prayer 3 times. But at the conclusion of the narrative, Jesus accepts the hour that it had come, time for him to be betrayed and killed. Now, the 2 things that I want to mention from this account are, first, we need to recognize that Jesus took regular time to pray. Now, we've heard this appeal many times in our lives, yet we still struggle to make prayer a priority. No one can complete this task for us. While we can pray for each other, there is no substitute for you sharing personal time with God. And second, each time that Jesus prayed to be spared from the pain and agony of his imminent death, he submitted his will to the will of the Father. There was no other way to bring salvation except to fulfill the Father's plan of a perfect sacrifice for all sin. So in our time with God, we need to be willing to submit our will to the will of the Father, just as Jesus did. Now, submission is not natural for us and has a huge learning curve. However, submission to God has the advantage of God's wisdom, God's plan, and God's love. Obedience and submission are areas of our lives that we guard fiercely, and we struggle as much with obedience and submission as we do with taking regular time to pray. So for those of us who call ourselves Christians, we must be striving to achieve both, because we can't obey and submit if we aren't regularly communicating with God. Remember how Jesus restored Peter after his resurrection? He asked Peter 3 times, "Do you love me?" Now in John 14, while comforting his disciples before his betrayal, Jesus told his disciples, "If you love me, keep my commands." So if we profess to love Jesus, shouldn't we be obeying him too? I hope that you will endeavor this week to spend regular time in prayer and to obey and submit to what you hear God say. Hey, thanks for listening, and I hope to see you again next week.